Good afternoon, happy Sunday, and happy Valentine's Day. I want to welcome you to the rescheduled broadcast of When Life Needs a Detox. Welcome. I will not keep you long today. My name is Carol White, and I am your life detox strategist. Well, we got through all of the issues I was having with my household dilemma. Thankfully, everything is just fine. So we are good. And I need to get you guys the references for this week because I am finding that when I try to do them early, they don't show up. And people keep asking me, where are the references you keep talking about? So you can bear with the middle-aged lady who can't figure out how to spell the. All right. Okay, so that's not going to go. So, well, some of these references are a little long and they just kind of don't fit. But anyway, this week's topic is how to have the race conversation. Now, the reason that I'm bringing this topic up is very simple. I went through the feed for this week, well, for last week's broadcast, and I was noticing a few things. Number one, there are some people that will comment, but they haven't watched the video, which that happens a lot because people oftentimes comment on the title rather than the content. You can't stop that. That just happens. Now, some people take the topic of racism as nothing more than a joke. I can't do anything about that either. But then there are just some people that were confused and wanted more information. Those are the people that I truly, truly admire, because to admit that you're unsure about something and you need help with clarification, that says so much about their level of intelligence and empathy. That's great. Now, I may not change their minds, but they want to see the other side. They want to see the other viewpoint. Those are great people. And then you have those that will basically say, I don't want to have a race conversation and I don't want you to have one either. Well, okay. I don't know how that works for them. I just don't see it as a way that can be handled by all, if you know what I mean. So it dawned on me that the problem could be just as simple as we don't know how to go about having conversations about race. It could be that simple. So let's start at the simplest point and break it down. And that is why we are going to talk about how to have race conversations. Now, the people I want to get out of the way first are those that just don't want to talk about race, that want to say race doesn't exist, it doesn't matter, there's no point to this, I don't see color, blah, blah, this, blah, blah, that. I get it. If that's how you feel, God bless you. I will not do anything to mess with your bubble. But here's the thing. If you do not want to talk about race, don't. Don't. Stay in your lane. If your lane says, I don't want to talk about race, you should not be over here in a lane getting into a conversation about race. You shouldn't be talking about race relations. You shouldn't be talking about any race-related subjects. You need to stay over here in this lane that says, I don't discuss race. And there's nothing wrong with that point of view. And I applaud it, provided you stay in your lane and stop telling other people what they need to be talking about, because that's not in your lane. Okay, now, for those who want to talk about race, there are ground rules for you too. Number one, respect. My mom and dad always taught me, you don't have to like what somebody has to say, but you must always respect the fact that they have the right to say it. So just as I choose to speak on racism in history, Black American history, how white history and Black history don't always coincide. You don't have to like that, but you need to respect the fact that I have the right to do it, or that anyone has the right to do it. You have to have mutual respect. There has to be commonality. Hey, sweetie, my husband, I love that man. Happy Valentine's Day. There has to be commonality. You have to have common ground for any conversation. Yes, you're going to talk about race. You have to decide what topic on race, because race is an ever-growing field and an ever-growing topic with subcategories that will boggle the mind. But you have to know what you're going to talk about. You have to monitor yourselves. You have to know, and this is the most important, one of the most important parts, you have to know talks about race relations are not easy. They're not always polite, and they're going to get heated. You need to be prepared for that. You need to be prepared to listen to opinions that are vastly different from your own. You need to be willing to concede a point. If they've made their point, say, you know what, I understand, and I get your point. Don't follow it up with, well, yeah, I understand, but, because as soon as you add but, that means you don't understand and you really don't care. You're going to have to use empathy, and you're going to have to be able to concede a point. Just like whoever is with you in this conversation is going to have to be empathetic. They're going to have to understand that it's going to get heated and they're not going to like everything that's being said. You're going to get frustrated. And these talks about race will challenge everything that you've been taught to believe on both sides. Now, you also have to know to stay on topic. Because, like I said, race conversations have any number of unlimited subtopics. So you'll start off about race, and you want somebody's going to go into police brutality. Somebody's going to go into the educational system. Somebody's going to go into a belief about God. You all got to be able to move it right back to the central point. Because if you go off on all of these tangents and you get away from your point, you're never going to get back to the topic. And you're going to be arguing and not really knowing why you're arguing or what you're arguing about. Also, you cannot have this conversation with people that don't want to have an enlightened conversation. Because the one thing you have to understand, to have a talk about race, you have to be willing to open your mind. You can't have these conversations with somebody with a closed mind. It does not work. Period. So there's, okay, I know I had to pick up a few things. Now, like I said, you have to be ready to respect. You have to resign yourself to the fact that this is going to be a hard conversation to have. And you have to be willing to reflect on what people are saying. You're going to have to be able to research and relearn. Because I'm like this. When I come to you and I'm talking about these topics, I've done research on every topic that I've come to. That is why I provide you with the references. Now, you can't, if you're coming to me in a comment and saying, that's not true, want to see my proof? Guess what? Yes, I do. You don't have to ask me. Put it in the feed and I'll research it. And if I'm proven wrong or there's another take on this, I'll be more than happy to come back and tell everybody what I learned. Because this is a learning process. I can't come in, just spout my ideas and say, oh, that's it. It's over. You can't change my mind. Now, he may not change my mind, but a different point of view is always good to present. If you have a point to make and you say you have research, let's see it. Because no one can learn if you don't provide it. And I might relearn a few things. May not change my mind, but I might relearn. And also, even though I say I won't change my mind, I have to be prepared to do two more things: reset and reboot. I do. I've got to be able to say, hey, wait a minute. I'm not totally wrong for the way I'm feeling, but I'm not quite right. So sometimes you have to reset, and you do have to revamp what you're thinking and how you're feeling. You might have to do a reboot, and it's okay. Now, rebooting takes a minute. So does resetting. But the fact is, you're open to the process. And also, the one thing we all have to realize when we're talking about race, we have to recognize bias and we have to recognize privilege. Let's face it, there is a privilege to whiteness. And we get it. We know that there's been a privilege ever since they broke it down. There's been a privilege ever since Bacon's Rebellion. And we talked about that before. And that's when there were white indentured servants and African slaves that were treated just the same. But then they fought in Bacon's Rebellion, and the English royalty, the English government, decided that to prevent Africans and whites fighting together, that they would create a class division so that the whites would feel superior to blacks. It's amazing how things get started. But there's a privilege to being white because, see, the white indentured servants were able to get out of their contracts. They could buy land. They could own guns. African slaves couldn't get out of slavery. Not for a long time. Forever. Well, let's say they got out of it, but it's a little shaky. But there were some that could buy their way out. There were some whose contracts may have or may not have been honored. And there's a whole thing about the 1619 contracts for the first slaves, because slavery didn't exist in 1619 in the colonies. But you have to be willing to acknowledge that there is a bias and that there is a privilege. When you can acknowledge that, and then you can respect how other people are feeling, these talks about race will go smoother. I'm not going to say smoothly, smoother, because you're still going to get agitated, because these talks, they really do question your belief system. But isn't it nice to know that at the end of the day, you can come to a resolution, or you can come away enlightened with information that you did not have before? It's beautiful. These talks are necessary. And look at the state of our country right now. Right now is when we need to start having more talks, more serious, more in-depth, more useful talks about racism. We need to have these conversations. We need to follow the rules, and we need to treat each other with respect when we are having these conversations. Okay, I said I wasn't going to keep you long, so I'm going to end this right here, right now. My references for how to have race conversations are all in the feed. I can always go back. I did mention two things that I have talked about before. Those references actually are in last week's episode, so you can go and get them. But if you ask me, I'll be more than happy to pull them up and post them again. But this is the end of my segment. I want to thank you guys so much for coming through and listening to what I have to say. My name is Carol White, and this has been the rescheduled broadcast of racism and history. I just got such a brain fart. I'm sorry. The rescheduled episode of Racism and History, Myth Busting and Truth Telling. I love you guys to the moon and back, and I will see you on next Saturday, provided I don't have another glitch in my household issues. Thank you so much, and I will see you next week. This is Carol White saying goodbye.